are in the world?
I don't know the exact number. I am going to guess probably around 200,000 or 300,000, because there are probably around 50,000 in the United States. So just sort of ticking off of that.
How did Saints Benedict and Scholastica's parents feel about them leaving home?
We don't actually have that in their writings, so it's hard to really know. But my guess is they probably had a hard time with it at the beginning, just because it's hard to lose your children that way.
Where did Saints Benedict and Scholastica live with their religious order communities? How did they form?
So, St Scholastica, I know hers formed off of her brothers. So she lived close to Monte Cassino, and Benedict actually founded that specifically for her to lead that monastery. St. Benedict himself actually had a couple of other monasteries he was part of before he started Monte Cassino, but the most important one really is Monte Cassino.
How old were they when they died, and how did they die?
So St. Scholastica, we know she basically just fell asleep, and most likely it was just age related, because you got to remember, back then people didn't live as long as they do today. And so what would have been relatively young for us today, I believe St. Scholastica was in her 40s when she died, would have been typical for that time. So she would have been actually a little old in her 40s. Benedict lived a little longer, I believe. I believe he was in his 50s or 60s when he died. And again, he just died of age.
Why are they called Benedictine nuns instead of Scholastica nuns?
Because they follow the rule of St. Benedict. And so Scholastica followed the same rule that Benedict did. And so that's why.
How did Jesus walk on water and make the storms stop?
Because he's God.
Why and what are all the different types of Catholicism?
So I'm going to answer this question in two ways first. So I want to make sure we're not making the question isn't making a mistake between Christianity and Catholicism. So Catholicism is part of Christianity, and there are many, many, many different Christian denominations. And I can't give you an exact number because, honestly, the Protestant churches form new churches relatively easily, so there are literally probably thousands of different Protestant churches, so that it's really kind of hard to pin that one down. But the breakdown really within Christianity is you have the Protestant churches, the Orthodox churches, which were the churches in what was previously the Eastern Roman Empire, and they formed a set of churches, and then you have Roman Catholicism. And then you have some churches that did break off of Roman Catholicism that more closely follow the practice of the Catholic Church, but aren't considered Protestant. Within Roman Catholicism itself, we have what's called the Roman Rite, which is what we belong to, and it basically is, the Roman Rite pretty much is the whole of the Western, what would have been Western Europe, and then everything that sort of came off from that. And within the Roman Rite, actually, you have a couple of smaller, you have what's called the Milanese Rite, which is the Ambrosian Rite, the Gallican Rite, which is in Lyon, centered in Lyon, France, and you have the Mozarabic rite, which is primarily in Toledo, Spain. And that's sort of the western part, and all sort of connected to what we belong to, the Roman Rite. Then you have what's called the Eastern Rite Catholic churches, which are equivalent to the Orthodox churches. And with I believe there are 28 Eastern Rite Catholic churches, and each of those churches have their own rules for sort of how Mass is celebrated, how they do baptisms and marriages. All of those things kind of are different, and they're done differently than the way we celebrate them, but they are all in union with the Pope. And so they are part of the Catholic Church, but they don't celebrate things exactly the same way we do.
Besides St. Tarcisius, are there any other little kid saints?
It depends on what you consider young. He's probably the youngest, but we do have like Dom Savio, Maria Goretti, and so there are some others that are like around 18 years or younger. So, but they're not what we would call they're not really children. Maria Goretti was. I think she was 14 when she died.
There also who's the one who, upon receiving her first communion, immediately died?
Yeah,
Yes.
I know.
Little Nelly of God. Imelda, Saint Imelda.
Yes. What is it like to be a saint?
Since I'm not one yet, I think it will be awesome. That's what I'm striving to be. I really want to be a saint, because being a saint means you're going to be in presence of God for all eternity, and I think that would be just amazing.
Can you know someone is a saint when they are still alive?
No. The very definition of being a saint is that you're in heaven. You can think and you can look at the way someone's living their life and recognize that that is most likely a life that's going to lead them there. So like someone like Mother Teresa, I think no one was shocked when she was canonized a saint because of the life she lived and how she lived it.
Why doesn't the devil like Jesus?
Because Jesus is basically leading people to God, and the devil wants to lead people away from God.
Why do we refer to God with male pronouns?
I have to be honest, I'm not 100% sure. I think essentially it comes out of God's relationship, particularly with Jesus, and the fact that when God was in relationship with the people of Israel, with the Jews, and he still is, but as that relationship grew and as it began, they saw God as Father. And so I think because the relationship with God as Father, it just using the male gender pronouns just sort of made sense. But the reality is God has no gender.
Was it hard for Jesus to say no to the devil?
I don't think so, only because we see what his responses are almost immediate, and his responses show just how connected he is to the will of the Father.
Why did the devil think Jesus would listen to him?
Because the devil's stupid.
Why aren't we allowed to eat meat on Fridays in Lent?
It's just what we call an ascetical practice. Asceticism means sort of how we discipline our bodies and helping us to follow God more closely. And it helps us to recognize that ascetical practices like fasting, not eating meat, these other activities we might do, help us to recognize that our body is a gift from the Lord, and that our bodies are intended to lead us to give praise to God, not just in a spiritual way, but also in a physical way. And so we do these ascetical practices to help us to do that in a deeper way.
What is your favorite way to celebrate the Lent and Easter seasons?
Pray. I'm going to be really honest. I love praying. So, but in Lent, I really do try to work on prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. So this year, in a particular way, I gave more money to charities than, and I as I prayed, God made it clear to me that, so I gave an extra 10, so I gave 10% of what I normally give, so I added 10% onto what I normally give to 3 charities that I don't normally give to, as a way of giving more back to God. And in Easter, it's the fact that I don't, so I usually fast through the year. I don't, so on Wednesdays and Saturdays, I usually don't eat until dinner time, because that, again, it's an ascetical practice and it helps me to get closer to God. And during the Easter season, I don't do that, because the Easter season is a time of celebration, and so you shouldn't fast during a time of celebration. And so during the Easter season, it's not doing those things that I would do during the rest of the year.
Do you have a celebratory meal on Easter? What to eat? Who does the cooking?
So I am actually going to my mom's house. So they asked me what I want, because I have not eaten meat for all of Lent, and so I actually asked them to make me beef stew, because I really like beef stew. And I knew if I get there a little late, that can just, like you get like a roast beef or something, if you're late, it can start drying out. So I asked them to make me, and she's gonna make me apple pie, because I gave up sweets too. So I'll get a homemade apple pie and beef stew, and I'm very looking forward to it, because I'm really at the point where I really want meat right now. Even more than sweets, I really want meat.
How did St. Padre Pio live through his pain for 50 years?
Prayer. He prayed a lot, and he really did offer his pain up for others. He really took on the sufferings of others as his own, and so he would offer up his own suffering so that it might lessen the sufferings of others, whether those in purgatory. So we believe those who have died, if they're not in heaven but they're going to heaven, are in a place called purgatory. So we pray to lessen their struggling in purgatory so they can get to heaven faster. Or he also offered it for the people who on earth were struggling, particularly with their own pain, whether physically or otherwise.
Why would Jesus want Padre Pio to feel so much pain?
It's not much that Jesus wanted him to. Jesus never wants us to suffer, but unfortunately, because Adam and Eve sort of messed everything up, pain and suffering became part of the human condition. And there are certain people who, and it's not just Padre Pio, there's this great saint called Lidwina Scheidem, who took on the sufferings of others also. And she recognized that no matter how much she suffered, it was nothing compared to the suffering of Christ, and Padre Pio understood the same thing. And so they had the capacity to take on more suffering. And again, as I said, they took on that suffering, not just take on suffering, but they were hoping by their taking on that suffering that they were actually helping other people.
Why did St. John Paul II forgive the man who shot him?
Because that's exactly what we're called to do. No matter what anyone does to us, we're always called to forgive them. Now, if we are in an abusive situation, we're not called to stay in that abusive situation. As a matter of fact, we need to get out of it as quickly as possible. But even as we get out of that situation, we're still called to forgive the person for what they've done. That doesn't mean we have to let that person be part of our life, but we have to forgive them. And that doesn't mean there won't be consequences. Our forgiveness does not mean that there shouldn't be consequences for what someone has done. But we have to still love them, treat them with respect, uphold their the sanctity and dignity of their lives at all times.
Why were some of the words in the Nicene Green changed?
Well, basically it was just to clarify stuff.
Why does doesn't the priest wear anything else like special shoes for Mass?
That never happened. Though the Pope used to. Pope used to have particular shoes that he would wear.
For Mass or just?
Just in general, yeah.
Why is it sometimes a sin to miss church, but other times it isn't?
So, basically, we should always be going to Mass on Sundays because Jesus basically told us to, and we're supposed to do what Jesus tells us to. But there are times where it is not reasonable to be able to get there, i.e. in the middle of this pandemic. It was not, particularly at the beginning, it was not really possible for people to go, or it might not have been safe for them health-wise. So if you're traveling and you're in a place where there is no Catholic Mass, so through no fault of your own, there's no way for you to get to Mass, there would be no sin in that. So it's a question of reasonableness. I'm going to put it out there. Sports is not a reasonable reason to miss Mass, because number one, there are a lot of other Masses that people can go to, but we should also never be putting sports above God. And quite frankly, Jesus made it very clear, going to Mass is not an option. It is a requirement of our faith. It's a requirement it is an expectation that God has of us to be on Mass and to keep holy the Sabbath. For us, keeping holy the Sabbath means going to Mass on Sunday, unless we're sick. Obviously, the elderly who might not have the capacity to be able to get there anymore because they can't drive or they don't have the ability to walk or whatever, there'd be no sin in them not being able to go. But it's got to be something on that level that prevents us from being able to go to Mass.
Why does an open hand mean a sign of blessing?
That's just cultural. That's not true in every culture. In our culture, it is.
What are the ingredients of the Eucharist?
So for the host, the bread that we have, it is simply wheat flour and water, and that's it. For the wine, it's just grapes that have been fermented into wine, and nothing else can be in them.
Do people sleep in heaven?
I don't think so. I don't think you don't need to sleep at that point, because sleep again is part of the fall.
Dad and you didn't sleep before.
I don't think they needed to.
Right, well that is all of our questions from middle schoolers. Please submit questions for next time.
God bless.
Thank you, Father.